Joining us right now on Texans Radio, it's General Manager Nick Caserio. Nick, how's it going?
Good morning, fellas. Good to be here.
All right, great to have you. I know the trade deadline's coming up. I want to get to this first, and we want to know everything that's going on, every call you're getting. No, just kidding about that. But what can you tell us about this time of year with this deadline coming up, because it is significant?
Yeah, generally speaking, as you get a little bit closer, most teams are going to have dialogue, whether it's department to department, and you're just trying to get a lay of the land to see if there's players that may or may not be available, that teams might be looking to move on from, and whether or not there's a player that might be able to help your team, whether it's now or in the future, or player for player, or whatever the case might be. So some of it is information gathering. So again, we just try to have conversations, on a fairly, sometimes it's a regular basis, sometimes it's not as often. So every team's kind of doing the same thing, kind of going through the same process. And then, once we get to Tuesday, everyone will have an idea. And then after Tuesday, the one thing that's different relative to the transaction, let's say you release a player, everybody has to go through the waiver wire. So whether you're a vested player or even a younger player, if you release a player, move on from a player, it's not as if they're vested and they terminate now. You kind of just transition to a different mode here. So
stress-inducing or sort of thrilling?
Not necessarily. I think you just kind of take it in stride. It's part of the process. Then, as you go through the arc of the year, there are different checkpoints and different, finite periods of time. Okay, this happens then, this happens then. So you're prepared for it, so you work through it. So it's just part of the normal process.
Just kind of another part of the player acquisition process, building the roster, kind of like the draft, kind of like the build-up to the draft. Obviously, I get really excited about the draft. It's kind of like that. It's just, it's just another piece of the process.
Yeah, nobody gets more excited about the draft than you do, John. So we'll have an analysis of 200 players by the time we get to March or April, whatever it is. So.
I think he's got it already, man.
It's already there.
He probably does.
It's already there.
But this is a season in progress here, and it's an evaluation also, because you have guys on this season who don't have the longest contracts in the world necessarily. It's football, so nobody's here forever. So how is that for you, evaluating these players as you move forward? You're not getting the results you want in the one-loss column, but there are individual results you may be getting.
The best way to approach this, and the reality of it, every day is an evaluation. So regardless of where you are in your season, regardless of where you are in your schedule, regardless of what your record may or may not be, each day is an opportunity for a player or whomever for individual improvement and to try to get better at your individual job. So the evaluation is continuous. It's not as if, during the season you don't evaluate. We're evaluating everything that we're doing, whether it's schematically, whether it's scheme, whether it's player performance, whether it's personnel, whether it's a player role. We made some changes last week going into the game and the whole return situation. So each week you kind of look at where you are, not necessarily reactionary to what happened that particular game just the other day, but all right, what is going on over the course of how many games and weeks? Are there things that we can do better? Sure, absolutely. How do we do that? So each day is an opportunity for us to evaluate everything that we're doing. Once you get to the end of the season, you have a little bit more time maybe to do a deeper dive. So it's really on the surface. Initially, you look at some things and just try to make some modifications and corrections as you go. So that's kind of how we approach it, or are approaching it.
Specifically on the field, Nick, it feels like the defensive line, and we talked about this a little bit, but it feels like that group the other day, when it went on the field, I was kind of excited to see what they were going to do. I mean, it felt like, man, John Grenard's coming along. He's got 6 sacks. I know about sacks. It's not always the greatest measure, but it feels like the defensive line's sort of coming around. What have you seen with that group up front? It kind of gives everybody some hope from what they're doing.
Yeah, they've played well at times. They've created some disruptive plays, whether it's the players on the edge or whether it's the players on the inside. Even, a simple play like Jacob had Martin on the safety.
Yeah. That's
a pretty disciplined play for a defensive end against a quarterback who is difficult to handle. So zone read, take care of your responsibility. Kyler pulled it, try to get out to the edge, but Jacob was in a good position. So sometimes it's a matter of executing your assignment as something as simple as opposed to just rushing a passer. Sometimes you get caught up in the sacks or the numbers or whatever else shows up on a stat sheet. But that's a part of it. But those guys have taken advantage of the opportunities when they've been on the field. You've seen some individual improvement. You've seen some collective improvement. So I think going back to Marc's question, as you evaluate what has happened from where you were maybe in training camp to the start of the season to now, you're starting to see some progress and improvement. So the goal is for that to continue, and maybe there's another player that we're not talking about that could potentially go on the same type of arc.
You've been dealing with injuries on the offensive line, Nick, and I know you're not running the ball the way you want to. You haven't given up that many sacks, which is interesting. When you look at some of the scores and situations you've been in, you think, well, maybe there have been a lot of sacks, and there really haven't. Can you evaluate the guys up front for us a little bit?
Yes, I think just as a team, the reality is we've probably just been inconsistent with our overall performance. So it's not about one particular group. I'd say holistically as a team, that group, they've played hard, they've competed, they've done some good things, they've been pretty good with their assignments. We haven't been able to do some things just relative to moving the ball on a regular basis, and it's one play here, one play there. When you add them up at the end of the game, if it's 10 or 15 plays, well, that's the result of you being able to move the ball and have some success, or kind of running into a little bit of an issue. So those guys have played hard. It was just kind of the same group that, to a certain extent, we had Britt was dealing with his situation. So, McCray had a different role, but, then he went in the game after, Max came out. So, we've essentially played 5 or 6 guys over the last few weeks. So, if there's an opportunity for us to improve it or something that we can do, we'll have that conversation and then go ahead and do it.
I know it's early in the week. Rams coming to town. Matt Stafford, guy that I know Marc and I and Andre have talked a lot about in Detroit, moves to L.A., and it just feels like, wow, the world is his oyster seemingly. I know you're not too far into prep, but what do you think about the LA Rams coming in here?
Yeah, really good team. I'd say specific to that position, they felt that was a way for them to upgrade their team, and I'd say Matthew's really playing at a high level. I think when you look at what Sean and Les have done, they're very aggressive on the team-building approach, so they're not afraid to make moves. So had Jared decided, they want to go a different direction, opportunity for them to have Matthew. But I think when you look at their team, Matthew certainly added a lot to their offense. Sean does a great job. I think his offense is very hard to stop. He marries the run and the pass game really, really well. Not only with Stafford, but really at 4 really good receivers. Kupp arguably is one of the best receivers in the game that I don't want to say nobody talks about, but he kind of gets lost in the shuffle. But he's as good of a player that there is at that position. So between Kupp and Woods, and then Jefferson's a third receiver, Jefferson to D-Jack, kind of third, fourth receiver. Higbee's done a good job for them at tight end. They have a really steady, consistent offensive line. I mean, Whitworth, I don't know how many years he's played. It's like 500, but he's just out there every play, and he's pretty consistent. And they've done a good job between Henderson and Sony, giving them some carries. So they present a lot of problems offensively, and Matthew's done a really good job. I think he's taken to what Sean's doing. I'm not sure how much different it is or isn't than what he was doing in Detroit, but he's done a great job, and he's very skilled and very talented thrower of the football, and you're starting to see that manifest itself a little bit, offensively. Defensively, arguably 2 of the best players at their position. Seems like we're having this conversation every week. This week it's AD, Donald, and they put him everywhere. He's 3 technique, his defensive end. Ramsey's a versatile player within their defense. I know they made a trade yesterday, Kenny Young, to Denver, I believe. So that's going to give probably Ernest Jones, or who they drafted in the 3rd round, just an opportunity maybe to play a little bit more. But I think the one thing when you look at their defense too, they were, the top-ranked team defensively in about just every category last year with Staley, and then Raheem has come in. And I would say they're doing some similar things. Raheem has kind of added his twist. I think when you look at Raheem specifically, it's got a pretty unique background. He's been a head coach, mostly been on the defensive side of the ball, coordinator. And then when he was in Atlanta, he actually worked on the offensive side of the ball. And now he's back coaching defense. So, that's a pretty diverse skill set. And he's done a good job. So when you look at how they're playing defensively, it's not that different from what they're doing last year. But, they've kind of added a couple twists that are, a little bit different, specific to maybe what Raheem wants.
Johnny always talks about seeing Aaron Donald at, what was it, the Senior Bowl? When you first,
Senior Bowl.
Yeah, and how he's not the biggest guy in the world considering the way he plays and what he does. What about that part of evaluating players? Well, this guy might not fit into the prototype of X, like Kyler Murray, a quarterback, for instance, but they can play. So you got to balance out the ability, the tape you see from the college stuff, and the measurables.
Mark, it's a great question. It really is philosophically, what are your beliefs? Are you really emboldened to height, weight, speed? And if a guy doesn't fall specifically in that realm, then you're going to move on from him. But like we talked about last week, whether it was Kyler or Buda Baker, not the biggest. They kind of don't fit the prototypical size, if you will, but they're really good football players. Aaron Donald, he's 6 foot, 300 and however many, 10 pounds. But they don't make athletes like Aaron Donald. So it doesn't matter like how big he is. He's very explosive. He has a lot of inline power. And I think he ran, 4.7, 4.8. So a guy that's 310 pounds that runs 4.8, it's just a measure of his explosiveness and his power and his quickness. He has very violent hands, so he's able to compensate for his size because I would say of his explosiveness, his strength, and his violent hands. And he plays his ass off. So when you put that combination together of a very skilled player that plays hard in every play, that's why he's the best defensive player, arguably, the top 1 or 2 defensive players in the entire league.
Now, the other side of that is Jalen Ramsey, who came into the league with every single asset you'd want in a defensive back. And I say defensive back because the Jags started him at corner. He played safety at Florida State. But now it feels like the Rams are sort of kind of moving him around. They're using him like the chess piece that he is. So you've got one chess piece up front you got to try and figure out. But then how much more difficult does it become? Because Ramsey becomes a chess piece that they're moving around as well.
It's a great question. You just have to look at their composition defensively and their structure. So maybe certain plays or certain calls or certain defenses, they're going to want Jalen here, or maybe 1 week it's matchup specific, matchup base. He's going to go to said receiver. So the ability to play perimeter corner and be able to play slot corner, that's not always the easiest thing to do. So it takes a pretty instinctive player, a player that's got really good awareness, that has good football intelligence. With, in addition to his physical attributes and skills, Jalen possesses those qualities. So since they acquired him, he's done a nice job. They've had some good corners here over the last however many years. So they traded for Jalen. They had Troy Hill, who wasn't drafted. However they acquired him, I can't remember exactly. So he left. Darius Williams, who wasn't drafted, who started his career in Baltimore. He's grown as a player and become a pretty good corner. So they've done a great job of acquiring players along the way at different ways, and it speaks to, I would say, Les and Sean, what they're doing from a team building philosophy. So they've invested a lot in the front in terms of, let's say, high draft picks. So whether it's Donald, invested in Floyd in free agency, traded for Jalen, gave up a boatload of draft picks, but then they also have players like Troy Hill, Troy Reeder, Darius Williams, who I would say weren't drafted or lower draft picks. So in terms of how they put the team together, they've done a pretty good job.
Nick, Tyrod returns to practice this week, and you have Davis playing in all these games. How do you balance, well, we want to see some of Davis. Tyrod might be eligible to come back or available to come back soon enough. How do you balance all that out with them and other players who might be in a similar situation?
Yeah, it's a good question. You want to look at what they're able to actually handle in practice and then what the plan's going to be, moving forward. So Tyrod looks like he's ready to practice, so he kind of start his return to play protocol and process a little bit. And then as we look ahead to the game a little bit, how we're going to play the game or who's going to play in the game will probably have some bearing on how those reps are allocated. So you can't get reps for everybody. You have to get the players that are going to play enough reps. So we're going to talk about that as a staff and just try to make a good decision about what makes the most sense for us.
As you were discussing the players on that team, I mean, you ripped through them, and I'm following you all the way along. And you mentioned Darius Williams, like, he started in Baltimore, and this. It struck me about the recall, and we used to ask Bill O'Brien about this. We asked him, what made Tom Brady great? He said, it wasn't anything physical. It was his recall. He could remember a game back in 2006 that he could then bring forward 10 years later and say, hey, I remember they did this and now they're doing this. How does your recall of players, of just the acquisition process of where they've been, how does that kind of help you as you move forward? Hey, that guy Darius Williams used to be Baltimore, used to be this kind of guy. Now he's with the Rams. And hey, how does recall help you in your position, Nick?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's an investment of time and energy and just understanding players. And you start with your college evaluations. So there's a lot of time that goes into the evaluation of the player. We write up a number of players. So whether it's here in New England, whether it was New England or here in Houston, we write up a number of players. So that information goes into our database. I'll personally write up, a fair amount of players and try to have a database and keep that catalog from, the draft, and then when they come into league. So each team that we play on a weekly basis, I go through my evaluation process of essentially evaluating the team, understanding their team building philosophy. How did that player arrive at the team? Where did he come from? What's his contract status? Is he going to be a free agent? They claim this guy off of waivers. So you're trying to get an overall understanding of the team that you're playing. So it starts with the head coach. It starts with ownership, and it starts with the head coach, his philosophy, and then their staff construction is reflective of maybe how they want to play, and then the players as a result. So if you have players, coordinator was with this player. We saw this in Buffalo, just going back to Buffalo. So when Sean and Brandon took over, you saw there was a number of players that Sean had background with in Carolina. So why is that? It's, you have a familiarity with the player, you have an understanding of the player, so you have an idea of how that player might be able to assimilate into your system. So I think what we all do, regardless of our experience, when you're with a team, when you're with a player, when you're around them on a day-to-day basis, you see some things, and then if you leave that building and go somewhere else, it's not, we're just trying to bring as many players from this place with us. We're saying it's very purposeful in saying, okay, he understands some of the things that we're doing. He has a lot of the attributes and qualities that we think are important. So that's why we think it's important for that player to come onto our team. But I think I would say personally, on a personal level, I really really enjoy that part of the process, just being able to understand players, because you never know when someone is going to be available and when that opportunity is going to come. So you want to have as much knowledge and experience as possible and overlay that and have a discussion with somebody on your staff. But you have to invest the time and energy to understand the players and not rely on just somebody else.
Along those lines, when you're going through and you're looking at a player, whether it's in college or it's a player in the NFL, how often do you look at a guy and go, okay, man, I see Troy Brown, or I see some other guy that I've been around that you recall from the days you were with them, and that's what I see in that particular player. How often does that kind of come into play for you, Nick?
It's a great question. You have to be careful of just extrapolating said player he's like so-and-so.
Right.
So you have to be careful about that. What you try to do is look at said player and say, here are strong points, here are his weak points. Here's what we think his role is going to be for our team.
Right.
Okay, we're going to use him as a nickel corner, and here are the reasons why. Then when you look at the actual skill set, you might say this player has some similarities to Joe Smith or said player. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be the same player, but you see some of the qualities and some of the attributes that are applicable to that player. So you have to be careful of saying this guy's just like so-and-so. He might be, but then it's unfair to make comparisons to a player maybe that has 10 years of experience versus a player who's going to be a rookie. But you're really looking at it from a physical trait characteristic standpoint, whether it's their playing strength, whether it's their size, whether it's their their ball skills, whether it's their body balance, whether it's ability to break tackles and be good with the ball. So that's where you're using kind of your library of players as a reference point to be able to make some comparison. While we're talking about the draft a little bit, we talked a little bit about this, last week, and we might get asked about it. But every Monday, we have people in our department that will send me a file of players. Okay, here are the schools I was at last week. Here are the players. So they have the player, a little write-up of the player, strong points, weak points, bottom line or vision, and a comparison and a grade. Okay, so then that's kind of, all right, that's good information. Then I'll put that into my kind of centralized database. And as I'm watching the player, okay, what did Lip think? Okay, what did Zeke think? What did John think? Okay, here's what I see. So then when you have those discussions in January, February, March, whenever, you're basing it off of, at least you have some knowledge and understanding of the player.
Now, do you share your notes with them after the weekend? I just want to know, because reportedly, allegedly, you do go to some of these games.
We'll have discussions.
Okay.
So, it might be a discussion. You know what? I see what you saw, or you know what? I see maybe something a little bit different. Let's have a little bit more deeper dive on this. And that's, I would say, when we have our meetings, those will be some of the discussions. What you have to be careful of is you're respectful of the work that everybody's doing, because that's why you've invested the time and the resources, and they have a voice, and we want them to have an opinion, and we respect their opinion. And then I'll have hopefully an informed opinion, and then we can have a dialogue and discussion, and then we can arrive at an endpoint. And in the end, we could agree to disagree, but ultimately, whatever decision we make collectively as an organization, that's the one we're going to go forward with.
All right, I have a question related to that, sort of. College atmospheres that you find really excellent. When you're in some of these buildings, you've been to a lot of them, other than maybe John Carroll home games. Let's put that aside for the moment.
5,000 people.
Yeah. So that's a pretty good crowd, though, for D3. That's not bad.
Yeah.
But tell us some of the favorites that you have.
Yeah, just tell us Brown University right off the bat would be good.
Yeah, I would say going back, forget what year it was, Georgia LSU. I think this was the year they had Beckham, Jeremy Hill, Landry, Mettenberger was the quarterback. They played at Georgia in October. That was a pretty cool environment.
Mm-hmm.
The environment at A&M a couple weeks ago when they played Alabama. Yeah. I would say it was a Thursday night game, Oregon, when I was a young kid. I forget exactly who they played, but Autzen Stadium is, it's louder than you think it is. It's not like the 115,000 people, but the way that the noise reverberates off them, it was just a really cool atmosphere. So. I would say, look, there's a lot of good atmospheres in college football. Those are a couple just going back through the years, I would say, that stand out to some degree.
Excellent.
Actually, I have another story. You guys will probably like this.
Okay.
So,
Come on.
Thursday night, Stanford, Oregon. I think this was the year Mariota came out.
Yeah.
So they played Thursday night. I was trying to get back to Boston that night. There was like a red-eye 11 o'clock flight or something like that. So when you park at Stanford, there's a parking lot, and everything is pretty tightly compressed. So you park on the grass, you walk over. So left the game. I knew I had to catch a flight. I think I was driving to San Francisco. And I go to my car, and my car is boxed in. I literally can't get out. and there's a sliver of space, and I had to make an executive decision and say, all right, do I just try to gun it and hope I make it through without any damage, or like I'm going to miss my flight? So I made a decision, all right, I'm going to try to sneak through. I did pretty significant amount of damage to the car, so I had to pay a fine. But when you don't want to miss a flight, you want to make sure that you get home. So
Did you leave a note?
no, they left me a note when they sent me the letter for the damage.
So
to
as
the
you're
car,
going
so
through there and you're just hearing this like, oh, I mean,
Didn't quite make it.
it was a pretty bad feeling.
Oh,
So,
my
But those
God.
are, I would say, the trials and tribulations of scouting. on the road.
Absolutely. Got to get that red
at
eye.
that point that bill comes in and you're like, Coach, I'm sorry, but I had to make my flight. I had to get back here.
You want to get home.
And we can't even draft Mariota, so there's that. Okay. Nick, thanks a lot for joining us. Good luck.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.